I would say tonight is, when any, please don't just believe me, don't just assume it's true, because I say so. Search the scriptures. Let the Bible be your authority. I had the privilege of teaching for several years at 2 different Christian schools in America. I never got a teaching credential, per se. I hadn't planned on teaching, but God had planned on it, and I think He's just laughing about the whole situation. But at the Christian schools you teach at, you basically get 2 kinds of students. You get those who are basically born and raised by Christian parents who want their kids to have a great education and be protected from the wiles of a lot of the public school systems. And in our area, they were recruitment for mules, you know what that is, drug runners, and for gangs. So there was a reason behind it. But then there were also those parents who basically were parents that would drop off their kid and say, you fix them. And so we get a batch of those kids. And that was just my mission, was those kids. As you might guess, most of them didn't have fathers, for instance, and so forth. So when a young lady, 15, comes into my my classroom, I would choose not to eat lunch with the teachers, where they would kind of sit and talk about their students and complain and such. And not all of them, because one of those teachers was my wife, and she wasn't like me. But I would sit in my own room and open up the doors and let the kids come in and just eat. That's where I learned how to eat spicy food, because it's the only time whenever I ever had to go to the toilet, I came back, my food would be gone. One of the kids in the room would have stolen it, so I learned to eat really spicy food so you could tell which kid stole your food. And when a girl comes in and says, yeah, my brother attacked my mom with a knife, I'm required to tell the authorities, understandably so. So when the authorities go into the house and arrest the boy for selling drugs, mom comes at me as classic domestic violence cases. She comes at me, the kid's somewhere between 16 and 18 years old, the boy, Bobby was his name. And she comes in and she's livid, she's very angry and very hurt and very confused, and all the things, the cyclone of emotions that hit a person in a time like that, where reality now is, in essence, hit you in the face with a board. And she comes at me and she starts throwing pictures at me of these iconic moments with her son. Moments where he was in Little League playing baseball, or moments where he had these really great, I mean, and he was, in fairness, he was a really cute kid. He just wasn't cute anymore. He was a predator in more ways. I mean, as things would come out, he was a predator in many ways by this point. But he'd have these brief moments where he would sort of surface and in essence be human. And she would take these pictures and she would use them. You don't understand. He couldn't possibly be this now, because look at what happened 4 years ago, what he looked like when he was 13. And he had this brief moment on his birthday or whatever. And the only reason I say that is, when we look at the history of a divided kingdom here now with Judah, we're looking at kind of the last iconic good moment before this thing falls down hard. And just because, and there are people, and you watch this a lot of times with really, really bad relationships, where she loves him and he abuses her and he mistreats her. And he's in all points, anybody from the outside looks, and it's obvious this shouldn't be happening. But she holds on to like those 3 moments where he surfaced for a moment and was human. And then they're like, you need to get away from this guy. This guy's he's a doofus. He is not the guy for you. And you're like, no, but, and you pull those little moments out. And the only reason I say that is people say, well, man's basically good. The Bible teaches the opposite. You need to recognize the whole foundation for clinical psychology is based on the idea that man is basically good. Somewhere got tweaked in, either in environment or whatever. If we can just get back to that moment of departure, we can make him good again. The Bible says the opposite. We're horribly wicked people, and we really don't need an excuse to be wicked. We need to actually be converted to not be. You don't have to teach a kid to be a criminal. You don't have to teach a kid to say no and be horrible. All you have to do is leave him alone. He'll do that on his own. And the only reason I say that is I look at this de-evolution of a people. What you watch at is any person who's in decline. If those snapshots of Bobby were actually his life, he wouldn't be in the place he's in today, which now, by the way, is prison. If that snapshot was not an event, but was a life, the same way that if that guy that she was going out with, that moment she holds on to is actually daily, it'd be a very different situation. Now, the reason I say that is as we go through this chapter, if this weren't an event but a life, they wouldn't have found themselves completely conquered in 586 BC by Babylon. We are only a handful of kings and roughly 25 to 40 years away from that now. This is our last good king. Of the 5 that remain, 2 of them will last 3 months. 2 of them will last 11 years. And they'll alternate. They will be taken captive in the middle of that. One of the kings will be deposed, and the only reason I say that is that you're going to see warning shot after warning shot, and God is going to bring prophet after prophet. The moment you're about to hit hard, and this is it, God is going to pull out all the stops because He loves you. This king, I remind you, his dad was murdered in his house, and the people who appear to have murdered him came up to the kid at 8 years old and said, "You're king now."
That was probably the best thing that happened to him, because otherwise he would have been
followed in dad's. Well, I can't say the best thing that ever happened to him was that his dad was murdered, but I can say that definitely it was a turning point, as it would be in anyone's life. But by 16, I remind you, he begins to seek the Lord. By 20, he begins to purge Judah of the high places and idols. By 21, Jeremiah shows up and begins his ministry. At 26, they find, as they're cleaning out the temple, they find a Torah scroll. Likely the last existing Torah scroll of its time.
This is the whole Torah scroll, because I was always told it was Deuteronomy.
Well, if you think about it, Deuteronomy is sort of like Cliff's Notes of the whole Torah. I mean, obviously, it sums up. I would say it's the whole Torah.
Yeah.
And we can certainly see one of the reasons is the way that he celebrates the Passover tends to be like he's really gotten it from Exodus 12 and not just from Deuteronomy's reiteration of it, for what it's worth. Well, and for that matter, Leviticus. And now all of a sudden, this scribe reads this book to the king. And the king responds by tearing his clothes, and he weeps. And he realizes, man, we deserve to get crushed. We have earned God's wrath. So they call out to hold of the prophet. And she says, wrath is inevitable. But it doesn't have to necessarily be imminent in your lifetime. This is because your heart was tender and you humbled yourself. You're going to see none of it. When God gets into an agreement, a promise, a covenant with this kid, who I remind you at this point is 26. And if you're 26 or younger, I'm old enough to call you a kid, because if you're 26, I'm actually twice your age. And then a little bit. The question is, what do you do? How do you respond when God lays out a promise in your life? When God laid out a promise for Abraham, he followed. When God laid out a promise to David, he conquered, if you think about it. When God laid out a promise for Solomon, he built. When God laid out a promise for Josiah, he feasts. And if you know the promises God has for you, great and exceedingly precious promises, that by those we might escape the corruption of this world, and through which we could partake in godliness, Do you realize no generation has had more promises than you? The promises God has laid out that start with what He's begun in your life, He will complete. To all of the promises of what happens if you're willing to walk in the Spirit instead of the flesh. Well, with that, now we're going to have this chapter that shows that purge, and what God says is the greatest Passover since Samuel. In other words, there has never been a Passover during all of the kings like this one. Now let me remind you what the Passover is in the simplest sense. It is a celebration of deliverance, of removal from bondage, out of the hand of the enemy and out of the land of slavery. But in the simplest sense, it's getting back to the Lamb. That's the point. It's getting back to God's Lamb where you were first set free. Now hear me. It's either going to be events or a lifestyle. Getting back to the Lamb of God. Is it not the first thing Jesus was called in his adult ministry by John the Baptist? Look, the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. In your life as a Christian, it will either be one where you kind of run off and do lots of crazy things and you find yourself in an event getting back to the Lamb, or you live with the Lamb. What happens when you make it just events? What I'd like you to look at as we go through this chapter is how desperate this place is. All the things he had to clean up, because this was a country at this point that made getting back to the Lamb periodical instead of as a lifestyle. Jesus is never intended to be side dish to the core of your life. He has to be central, not coincidental. And if anything is called Christian and Jesus is not the center of it, I'm not buying it. First of all, I have a hard time calling something a Christian t-shirt. It's like, it was a heathen t-shirt, but someone prayed over it and got to pray with it, and it was black, and now it's white or something. They got washed clean, and it's white as snow. But it's like, it's not a Christian t-shirt. It's not a Christian dog. The only thing that can become a Christian is you. But let's face it, if you're dying of cancer and it's manifest on your skin, and now skin's been treated, but the cancer's not gone, you are not healthy. You're just a little less sick. And adding Jesus as a little bit of something to your life, like a side dish, is never going to cut it. It says no other foundation can be laid that except Jesus Christ. Interesting. Even Peter understood that the only thing you can really build on is Jesus. And the reason I say that is, when people talk about upon this rock I'll build my church, Peter knew it wasn't him. But as we read this chapter, and I wanted to say this to preempt, I'd like you to look at what we read he has to do. How bad it becomes, and God willing, we'll go through those to some degree, about our own lives and what that could look like. Y'all ready? Because at the end of it, he's going to say, this was the best. This was the best Passover. Imagine Dora meets the perfect man. Sounding good already, isn't it? He loves Jesus. He's a godly man. And he's going to treat her like the princess, the daughter of the King of Kings that she deserves. And with that, they know they get married 5 years down the line. Every year they have this getaway. It's just the two of them. No matter what happens with life, no matter how busy they get, they have this 1 week tucked away. We have those, my wife and I. But let's say 20 years down in marriage, they're going to look back at 20 of those, And there's going to be probably one or two of them that are going to stand out. They'll remember them all to some degree. 20 years into it, you probably remember them all, to be honest. You get to around 30, you don't remember all of them very well. But you'll always remember a couple of them that will really, really stood out. And it won't be, to be honest, the event, the place you were. It may contribute to some degree, but it won't be the most important thing. It won't be the things you did. It'll be the relationship you had with the person you married to. You'll be able to go, oh, that one was awesome. We enjoyed each other so much on that trip. Well, I guarantee you, it was the prep up to that point that made that trip so good. And the reason I say that is that's what God's saying here about this. He's going, this Passover, that week where we spent together, this was my favorite. Well, what had to happen to get there? 23:1. Now the king sent them to gather all the elders of Judah and Jerusalem to him.
The king went up into the house of the Lord with all the men of Judah, and with him all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the priests and the prophets and all the people, both small and great. And he read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the house of the Lord.
Then the king stood by a pillar and made a covenant before the Lord, to follow the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes, with all his heart and all his soul, to perform the words of this covenant that were written in this book, and all the people to stand for the covenant.
And the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest, the priests of the second order, and the doorkeepers, to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the ritual articles that were made for Baal, for Asherah, and for all the hosts of heaven. And he burned outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and carried their ashes to God.
And he removed the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places of the city of Judah and all the places around Jerusalem, and those who burned incense to Baal, to the sun, the moon, the constellations, and to all the hosts of heaven.
And he brought out the wooden image from the house of the Lord to the brook of Kidron outside Jerusalem, burned it at the brook Kidron, and ground it into ashes, and threw its ashes on the graves of the common people.
Tori, do you remember standing on the Mount of Olives, looking at Jerusalem, with that valley in between?
Yeah.
That's a broken bone. Sorry, I had to do that. Next time it'll be you.
And he brought all the priests from the city.
No, it's verse 7. You don't want to miss this one.
Then he tore down the ritual wreaths of the perverted persons that were in the house of the Lord, where the woman wove hangings for the wooden image.
And he brought all the priests from the cities of Judah, and defiled the high places where the priests burnt incense, and he devoured their sheep. Also he broke down the high places at the gates, which were at the entrance of the gate of Joshua, the governor of the city, which were to the left of the city gate.
Nevertheless, the priests,
That's good, Eddie.
the priests of the high places did not come up to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem, but they ate unleavened bread among their brethren.
And he defiled Tophet, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, that no man might make his son or his daughter pass through the fire of mine.
Then he removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun at the entrance of the house of the Lord by the chamber of Natan Melech, the officer who was in the court. And he burned the chariots of the sun with fire, which is an effective way to burn something, with fire.
The altars that were on the roof, the upper chamber of Ahaz, which the kings of Judah had made, and the altars Manasseh had made in the two courts of the house of the Lord, the king broke down and pulverized there, and threw their dust into the brook Kidron.
Then the king defiled the high places that were east of Jerusalem, which were on the south of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon, king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Sidonians, and Chemosh, the abomination of the Moabites, and for Milcom, the abomination of the people of Ammon.
And he broke in pieces the sacred pillars and cut down the wooden images, and filled their places with the bones of men.
Moreover, the altar that was at Bethel, and the high place which Jeroboam the son of Nebat who made Israel sin, had made both that altar and the high place he broke down. And he burned the high place and crushed it to powder, and burned the wooden image.
As Josiah turned, he saw the tombs that were there on the mountain, and he sent and took the bones out of the tombs and burned them on the altar, and defiled it according to the words of the Lord, which the man of God proclaimed, who proclaimed these words.
Then he said, "What gravestone is this that I see?" So the men of the city told him, "It is the tomb of a man of God who came from Judah and proclaimed these things which you have done against the altar of Bethel."
And he said, "Let him alone, let no one move his bones." So let his bones alone, for the bones of the prophet who came from Samaria.
No, Josiah also took away all the shrines of the high places that were in the cities of Samaria, which the kings of Israel had made to provoke the Lord to anger, and he did to them according to all the deeds he had done in Bethel.
He executed all the priests of the high places who were there on the altars, and burned men's bones on them, and he returned to Jerusalem.
Then the king commanded all the people, saying, "Keep the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant."
Such a Passover surely had never been held since the days of the judges who judged Israel, nor in all the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah.
But in the 18th year of King Josiah, this Passover was held before the Lord in Jerusalem.
Moreover, Josiah put away those who consulted mediums and spiritists, the household gods and idols, all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, that he might perform the words of the law which were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the house of the Lord.
Now before him there was no king like him, who turned to the Lord with all his heart, all his soul, and all his might. According to the law of Moses, nor after did any arise like him.
Okay, let's take it from there for a moment. Let's take a look at this for a moment, and let's walk through this together, what this guy had to clean out. Talk about house cleaning. Here's where it starts. Verse 4. The articles that were made for Baal and for Asherah. Baal, by the way, I remind you, means master or lord. And the reason people sided with this, because it allowed them, in essence, to decide that they were, hear me on this, that they were the Lord of their own lives, while pretending like and convincing themselves that an entity was actually Lord instead. But since he didn't exist, they were able to kind of make it up as they went along to some degree. So they could pretend like there is a Lord above them when there really isn't. Asherah, by the way, Asherah, was one, as is Ashtoreth, were goddesses of pleasure. They were ones that basically took God's confines and redefined them in whatever way you wanted. We're going to see that even more so here in a moment. Where were those articles in verse 4? They were in the temple. Yeah, those things were in church. Now, how can we play that out on our own? You just tell God your destiny. You tell God your dreams. He has to get behind them. He's going to bless them. You just tell him this is what it is. He is no longer the Lord in that circumstance. And you could call him Lord and put a slap out in Jesus' name at the end of it all, and he is contractually obligated to meet that. That plays out today. Asherah and Ashtoreth, by the way, the whole idea of that is, I know that God says this about marriage. I know that God says this about what's acceptable in regards to romance. I know that God says these are the limitations. But come on, do we really have to take those antiquitish, archaic standards? Yeah, we do. Because God's actually never, and I've learned this, the truth is never contingent on democracy. Have you learned that? Look at, and what, by the way, this is what I'll bring out the thing, and you tell me what he did with it. What does he do with these articles?
He burned them outside Jerusalem.
And then, yeah.
And then scattered their ashes.
Yeah. And they carry their ashes to, man, that's a great place to start. To be honest, some of my favorite verbs are handled in this. And what you're going to find are none of them are gentle. It isn't like he gingerly and carefully carried this out. He tenderly caressed this as he let it go to the wind. He burned it. And then he took the ashes and he carried them to Bethel and he went, there he goes with that. Let's go to the next thing. The idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained, and that's, by the way, his dad and grandpa. By the way, I want to remind you, his grandpa, remind you, is Menashe. They were on staff. These guys were on staff. The state was paying for false priests. I got to be careful how I say that here. For people who, by the way, did not even believe in God. Do you know there's a whole group of people that are vicars in this country that are part of a group that are, in essence, atheist vicars? They're calling themselves an elite group that today, according to, at least I should say this, last year, 2017, there were over 600 of these guys on staff by the government as vicars, some bishops that do not believe God exists. That is astounding. Could you imagine going in to an NA, to your office, to your doctor, and you're going, I don't actually believe in any of this medicine mumbo jumbo. You'd be wise to run. Food, schmood. Come on, I think we should eat whatever we want. Okay. What did he do with the priests? He removed them. By the way, the term is literally flung them. Not a gentle word. It isn't like, come here, let's just go for a walk. Stay there. Verse 6. The wooden image. Okay, you think we're aware that's the giant phallus? Do I have to say any more than that? Yep. Where was this?
In the house of the Lord.
It was in the church. It was in the temple. Could you imagine? Don't even try to imagine this. What did he do with this? Took it out. He flung it out, and then what? Burned it, and then what? Ground it to ashes, and then flung the ashes. I mean, is that overkill? Apparently, this guy's got some fury in him, and he realizes, hear me on this, he's pretty serious about this thing. This thing he is dealing with. Do you know, I sat down with a pastor one of the last times I was in America who told me that he's convinced at least 45% of the pastors that he works with in his denomination are addicted to pornography. Now, no doubt it's epidemic. Do you know, we have all guys on staff. We make sure that they're subscribed to a thing called X3 Watch, and we collect each other's. Now, it isn't like it's. By the way, it's what it does is it just basically says if you're on a questionable site, it sends that information to whoever you've decided are your accountability partners every day, every week, or every month. That's up to you guys to decide. But we require that. And not because we're like trying to diss into someone's life, but because we want them to be above reproach. And someone goes, I think that guy was whatever. And I'm like, I could actually show you every report of Daniel Taylor to tell you how clean that kid is in his browsing records. Because I get it every week. Now, I don't ever expect to see anything there. But I look every week anyways. I look every week anyways just because I want to be able to say I've looked. Is it not rampant in the church? There are churches I've been in where it's like people are the choir directors sleeping with at least half of the altos. And it's like, and nobody's saying anything about it. Well, we can't just fire that person, can we? We can't just, I mean, that person's super talented. And what would happen is people will leave the church if that worship leader gets kicked out or whatever. My answer to that is, let me see, he brought it out, he burned it, ground it to ashes, and then threw the ashes on the graves. I don't know if you could get any more serious about this thing. But 7's the one that blows my mind. He tore down the ritual booths of the perverted persons that were in the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for the wooden image. What's the wooden image? We already went through that. You already know what that is. Now the women have woven curtains for this giant phallus. And as they've woven these curtains, I don't have to I don't think you have to spend any time figuring out what took place in the booths. Where was this taking place? Where were these booths?
In the temple.
In the temple. This is worse than Soho.
In the past. I mean, it's clean now.
So yeah, so
It used to be.
well, here's the point. It's like think of it as confession booths. Like there was a curtain in a little booth, and there was a gal or a guy waiting in there. And you got to pick. You just kind of walked through and picked whatever one was free. And you did your thing, closed the curtain. The curtain that was closed basically just had a woven, thing that was dedicated to the giant phallus. Welcome to church. Let's face it, if you did this, church would be full of people that would not be repenting. You'd be hurting people for hell. Could you ever imagine this is what it goes to? Let me warn you, even if you don't see it in the general church, I remind you, what's the temple today? You are.
Yes.
And you realize, are these caveats in my own heart? Little spaces dedicated to whatever the thing is. What did he do with the ritual booths? Tore them down. And the idea, think of a guy with a one of those really big heavy hammers, just swinging it indiscriminately. You don't want to be near this thing. I don't know what kind of, it's like you chase the family line somewhere down that grandpa was David, who didn't have a problem taking on Goliath or a bear or a lion, according to his own testimony. And somewhere down the line, a little bit of that seems to have made its way down to this now 26-year-old kid, who, by the way, is just going ballistic. Now look at it. We live in a country of nuances, but the world doesn't seem to have a problem stepping on people's toes. They just told you can't step on any yourself. Have you noticed that? And even when I noticed this last couple of days, something that occurred to me, they're redeeming terms. That's how don't you dare say preach or use the Bible, you're a Bible basher, and preach, that's a bad word. And don't say that word, and you can't say redeem, no one's going to get that. And the church has told us these things. Because after all, if they don't get it, remember when, maybe some of you aren't old enough, but Bob, I'll say this fairly easily. Remember when geek was an insult or nerd was an insult? I mean, those were like horrible terms to call somebody back in the day. Back in the day. But all of a sudden, it's like a group of people decided we're going to take that term and claim it as our own. That's what we're going to do. And all of a sudden, it became a cool term. And the only reason I say that is, if we Christians like, I don't want to say I'm religious because, that's kind of a negative term. Let's take the term back and redeem it. All it means is devoted. We should be devoted. We should be religious. I had a shirt that was made by one of my pastors because of a sermon that says, yes, I am religious. And on the back it says, expect me to preach. Because those are two negative terms, and I'm telling you, I'm taking them back. And they took these ritual booths of these perverted persons, and they filled the house of the Lord with these things.
It's called there, isn't it?
What's that?
It's called holy persons, isn't it?
You know what's interesting? Kadosh, Kadesh,
Yeah,
Kadesh is actually the same word except for a dot. This is why I always have to get my eyes checked when I read the Hebrew. Because the difference between a temple prostitute and a holy is a dot. So you're like, is that a fly? And obviously, that's really important to know the difference. So we tore down these things. In verse 8, there were high places. We talked about that. But now, as he's going ballistic on that, look at verse 9. Nevertheless, the priests of the high places did not come up to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem. Even though we tore down all those high places, where you could do it whatever way. By the way, do you know what took place primarily on those high places? They burned incense and they meditated. Find that very interesting for what it's worth. Don't think any of the stuff that's happening today is new. Now, listen to some of these verses, and maybe you'll get an idea why in the world. And I'm pulling them from Deuteronomy, and this is one of the reasons why people would say stuff like this. Deuteronomy 18:10 says, "There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire, who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer." Do you know that God actually says witchcraft is an abomination to him, and he doesn't want it anywhere near him? Do you know how unpopular that message is here? especially since we are desperate to be put on the map and we'll take anything. And if that includes somebody who writes books on witchcraft as the hero, people adore those books. God, and I just want to warn you, look call me what you want on it, but you're going to have to take it up with the Word and decide whether it's my opinion or God's. But in the end of all, God doesn't say it mildly bothers him. It says he calls it an abomination. Do you know what an abomination is? Something so disgusting to you that it makes you nauseous. If I were to develop that, it wouldn't be good for any of us, and it would be good for every one of us. What really that looks like. God's like, I don't want it anywhere near me. In Deuteronomy 7, verse 25, he says, you shall burn the carved images of their gods with fire. You shall not covet the silver or gold that's in them or on them, nor take it for yourselves, lest you be snared by it. It is an abomination to the Lord your God. Nor shall you bring an abomination in your house, lest you be doomed to destruction just like it. You shall utterly hate it, detest it, utterly abhor it, for it is an accursed thing. So this idea of him burning these things is just straight out of the Torah. He goes, look at, do you know why you burn something? So you can't take it back. That's the simplest of it. You can break something and glue it. You can kind of think that you've ruined it and fix it. Have you ever done that? Oh, I'm just going to make that inconvenient. It's amazing how inconvenient things that you want that are sinful, you'll still find a way. You know, I'm an alcoholic, but I'm just going to lock all of that in a chest, but I'll keep the key in another room. It doesn't take you much to get up and go into the other room and get the key if you really want it. God says, burn it, man. Don't even make it so you can get back to it. Deuteronomy 12, verse 9 says, for as yet you have not come into the land of rest, or to the rest, and the inheritance in which the Lord your God has given you. But when you cross over the Jordan and dwell in the land which the Lord your God has given you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies all about, and you dwell in safety, then there will be a place where the Lord God chooses to make his name abide, and it's there that you shall bring all that I command you of your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the heave offerings of your Lord, and all your choice offerings which you vow to the Lord. In other words, God says, I have a specific place I want this done, and that place is the temple. You're not to do it on every high hill. Because if you do it on every high hill, you'll do it your way, God says. But if you approach my way, you approach with me, you have to do it my way, which requires sacrifice. Think about how much of our Christianity doesn't involve sacrifice. Now, when you talk about the sacrifice of Christ, no doubt that's what makes us right with the Lord. But how much of our worship even involves obedience? Obedience, there's sacrifice in obedience. You may have to sacrifice your logic to some degree when God tells you to do something. You're like, that makes no sense. And God says, does it have to make sense for you to do it? But that's not convenient. God says, does it have to be convenient for you to do that? That's costly. God's like, does it have to be cheap for you to do it? What I've learned is love doesn't seem to mind any sacrifice. And what's crazy is neither does addiction and neither does sin. Look at verse 10. He defiled Topheth. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I can't believe he defiled Topheth. Oh my goodness. Really? Topheth? Really? And you're like, what in the world's Topheth? Right? Let's just be honest. First of all, my first thought is, how do you defile something that's already nasty? Here's the most amazing thing. This was considered holy. It was considered so holy that taking the bones of a dead person, for instance, would defile it. Now remember, defiling means polluting or making it too dirty for worship. Well, what happens at Topheth? It says, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, which, by the way, is on the other side. Jerusalem is kind of, it's a hill, and that's why you go up to it no matter where you come from. And there's two valleys. On the eastern sides, the valley is the brook Kidron, then there's the Mount of Olives. On the western side is the valley of Hinnom. By the way, that is where Judas hung himself, in the valley of Hinnom. It is also where this took place. It says, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, that no man may make his son or his daughter pass through the fire to Moloch. This is where people sacrificed their children, burning them alive on the idol, on the brass idol of Moloch. I remind you, it's a big brass hollow idol that had a lap, and under the lap was hollow, and they would put fire underneath it. They'd put wood and then set it on fire until the idol became red. And as the idol became red, they'd throw their children onto the lap of this idol, and they would be burned alive right there. So why call it Tophet? Because Tophet is a drum. It is a big, loud drum. Traditionally, it was beat so loud. By the way, interestingly enough, I've noticed, you're probably aware of one of my degrees is in world music, that it's very similar to club beat, that like that. The purpose of playing this drum was so loud, was so that you couldn't hear the screams of babies. And by the way, it wasn't just babies. Sometimes it was 2, 3, 4-year-old children. And so when he defiled, how do you defile that? And it's like, this isn't going to happen again. Now, in the simplest sense, and I like to say this is the most extreme, sin makes people less important and makes you more important. You follow Christ and you walk in the Spirit, other people will be more important. Stuff will be less important. And when you dive into sin and you put yourself first and you make it all about your world, people become less important. The classic example, you watch a guy that has impregnated a girl but is completely consumed with himself, so he has no responsibility to her, he has no responsibility to the child, and ultimately that child will never meet her dad. In other words, this man could care less about this thing that he's had part in creating, this human life. Sin does that. You stop caring about people, but could there be anything more heinous? But notice it says that no man might make his son or daughter. It's the men throwing their children on there. I don't know what the mother's doing during this time, but I can't imagine she's enjoying this either. While the drum is beat. Now let's face it, if you were ever there, if you were there for one of these events, just one, and you ever heard that drum again, and I'm not saying all drums are from Satan and all that stuff, that's not what I'm saying. The point is, if you heard that again after that moment, you either numb yourself to that, or you change. Have there been events in your life that have been so heinous that the smell or the song that played back then or whatever brings back that memory? There's a gal I know that really, really sweet gal who I remember walking down the street with. She and my wife were best friends at the time when she lived near us. And she'd been gang raped at a party that she was at when she was a teenager. And in the background was the song by the Eurythmics, Sweet Dreams. We were walking down the street, and it's 15 years later. And someone's driving by, and some of you are familiar with the fact that Marilyn Manson redid the song, as did several other people. And someone's listening. It's not even the Eurythmics anymore, but it's the same song. But she hears the song and she falls to pieces in front of us. Because there's so much associated in that moment, but that was part of it. The only reason I say that is that we create environments. Now, in this case, there's no way to put Stephanie in, and there's no fault to put in that. That's obviously at the point. The point is there are things in your life that will trigger you to back into your own sinful nature, and you will know those things better than anyone. Keep away from those things, man, whatever those things are. And sometimes you'll find you can see it. I know guys, because we've been dealing with addicts for the last 8 years here, as we've been doing for quite a bit even before that. And I can tell you certain guys when they're just about to use again. By the nature and certain things that they start being drawn to again, certain ways they start behaving around other people. They're quicker to take offense, or they find blame in something, or it's like they're triggers. And I just want you to know there are triggers in your own life too. Things you can watch guys fall back into porn, and if you know people, because we've dealt with several people that have had that addiction, and we've seen them free from it by God's grace, you start seeing these triggers that lead them back into this point, and it's just basically things that put you back into the flesh that then predispose you to falling. And the only reason I say that is, man, look at those things need to be. And the whole idea of permanently defiling something is that it's so sick, and you see it as so sick that you don't go near it again. Then we got verse 11.
Sorry, this Hinnom thing, it's, it means wailing from the cries of the children.
What's that? Hinnom?
Hinnom, yeah.
Yeah, well, some people say it means hell, but it's arguable, yeah. In verse 11, he removed the horses that the kings of Judah had dedicated to the sun, and in the entrance of the house of the Lord by the chamber of Netanmelech, the officer who was of the court, and he burned the chariots of the sun with fire. And you go, did any of you get that and go, oh, totally got that. I'm sure I know what that's about. Well, tradition taught, by the way, amongst the Syrophoenician religions, that the sun was pulled through the sky by horses and chariots. I don't know. I've never seen them. You ever seen them? It'd be weird because we know better now. All we did is we read our Bible and we knew better. And so what they would do is they would take these horses and strap chariots on them, and they would decorate them, and they would put icons of the sun. And at every sunrise, they would parade them in procession around, and people would dedicate themselves to the sun that day. Now, the whole idea of it is and here's the sad part. It's God who made the sun. Coming from an ocean town, it is amazing how many people stop at God's creation to worship it because they see it as glorious. And it's only a reflection of its creator, who's infinitely more glorious. But the difference is, you don't claim lordship to a tree, or to a wave, or to the sun. Well, in this case, the whole idea of it is, you bring me warmth, you give me direction. And you just removed it. And the idea, of course, in all of that is, what we go for guidance, what we go for strength, what we go for love, what we go for peace, all of those things that God uniquely can give us. And the moment we trade God in for one of those things, on any of those areas, that's what needs to be cleaned out. And I remind you, it's when these things are in your life that you try to, let's just face it, what would happen if every Sunday was the most amazing Sunday? This is what it's going to take, is to get these things out. Hey, I've been on trips, and I'm sure you have too, with even people that were just really, really good friends, but their heart was somewhere else, their mind was somewhere else, either out of worry or they wish they were somewhere else, and that you were like, why are we even here? And I wonder how many times God could look in church and see that. Where they're like, why are you even here? You're not really here anyways. Your heart's somewhere else, your mind's somewhere else. And he goes, wouldn't it be great if this really was a date? We were really together and we were enjoying each other, and I want to talk to you and love you, and you're coming in and you really want my peace and you really want my joy and you really want to feel that love, but you're not even here for me to give it. If I poured all of that, you wouldn't even be here to receive it in the first place because you're somewhere else. Because you're still trying to get guidance through this, and you're still trying to get peace through this, and you're still looking for protection from that, and you're still trying to make sure that your whole life is orderly and right, and so that you can be able to explain what's going to happen in 5 years, and you're just like, you're not following me when you're doing that. Verse 12, the altars that were on the roof. The upper chamber of Achaz, by the way, remember it's his dad, the kings of Judah had made the altars which Menashe had made, that's his grandpa, the 2 courts of the house of the Lord. Look at what he did with these false altars. He broke them down, and what else did he do?
Pulverized.
Oh, I love that word. You ever seen anything pulverized before? Usually, those are the things you find in those newspapers. You probably shouldn't be reading anyways because nothing edifies ever comes out of them. But you ever watch it, like videos of, watch this cop get beaten within inches of his life, and this guy kung fu fob that does this thing, and it's like pulverizing is to the point where you start removing features out of someone. When you pulverize someone, you can't recognize their face when they're done. You start breaking structure. He took the wrecking ball of this, and he threw their dust in the Kidron places. He defiled the high places. He broke in pieces the sacred pillars, the wooden images. What that tells you is is that though there was one giant wooden image in the church, you could take a souvenir home with you. How about a little wooden phallus keychain? Just, okay, kids, check it out. This is what I got from church. Do you know that there are churches in Los Angeles that hand out condoms at the end of their service? Yeah. And all I can think of is this. That's what I look at when I see. That's what I see when I read this. They're like, well, and they're not even saying don't do it. They're just like, well, we know you're going to do it anyway, so, we just know that God would want you to do it safely. God's like, actually, He knows what safe is, and what you're doing ain't safe. Fill their places with the bones of men. Over the altar that was at Bethel, I remind you, that was the one at Jeroboam, the first. No sin mentioned more in Scripture by a person than that one. And understand, it's really where this whole thing starts, and that is, he's like, look at, I know that if you go down to Jerusalem, remember that's when there's a civil war, and that's the north. He's like, I know if you go down to Jerusalem, you're going to bail on me and you're going to want me dead, so I need to come up with something quick. So let's put a big gold cow here in Bethel. And it's interesting because Bethel, by the way, Bethel is not a positive name in Scripture when you look at it. It's always a place of idolatry here. And it's like there's this idol, and he goes, you guys go here, and this is your God now. It's touchable, it's feelable, it's tangible, it's everything. Look at, come to our church and make sure you get something that's tangible. This is going to be tangible. Because it's not going to take faith, man. And you can do kind of whatever you want here because that's cool because the cow's not going to tell you anything anyways. But there's a cow you can look at. You can touch the cow. You can look at the cow. Look at the gold cow. There's the cow. Woo, there's the cow. You can get the shirt. I saw the cow. And it's like, it's amazing because this is the thing God says, I take exemption because this was where you departed. This is where, please hear my heart in this. And I believe it the heart of God. It's like you were on the right highway and the slip road was, I am tired of serving something I can't see. I'm tired of listening to something that I can't stare at that I can't watch his mouth move. I'm tired of waiting for that thing to wrap its arm around me, to hold my hand, to do whatever. I'm tired of that thing because it's not come to pass and I'm not seeing it, I'm not hearing it, I'm not touching it. So God, if you're not going to give it to me, I'm going for it anyways. It's going to be my God whether you declare it or not. And God goes, that's where you left me right there. That's where you left me. That was the moment. She's on the internet. She's lonely. She wants a conversation with her husband. She just doesn't know how to have it. But it's amazing how brave you can be on the internet that you would never be face to face with someone. And she wanders. She gets on one of those chat lines. And up to that point, she is in horribly dangerous territory. Because what that tells you is she knows there's some place where it could be found, that should be found. But instead of taking steps in that direction, she's looking for an easier way. Finally, sooner or later, it won't take long before John something at this, it's 16:14, whatever, or Cool Tiger 14 pops up on the screen, and she starts, there's no face to this. This is safe, right? She starts opening and unpacking her heart that she should be doing to her husband. And he starts responding back with what seems to be tremendously caring and listening answers. Because she's spelling it out in a way that even her husband would understand. Where's the point of departure? Up to this point, at this point she is just, can I just say it? She is driving like this on the road. And she is going to crash at any given moment, and then he says, you want to meet? She's like, oh, I could put a face out, and her heart races. She's like, oh, this could be reality. She types yes, she stares at it, and she hits return, and off she goes on the slip road. And I sat in more than one of those circumstances where we sought to seek to restore that couple. And we can all agree that's horrible. But how many of us do that with the Lord? kind of wandering. We're just kind of checking and just seeing what else is out there. We're like window shopping. But you can only window shop for so long before you spend money somewhere. I've learned that. Because I minister a lot in markets, be that in Camden or in Spitalfield, or around here or in Greenwich or in Deptford. You walk by something 16 times and the first 15 times you never even thought about it. The 16th time you're like, that really doesn't look so bad. I can tell you, I got about a handful of shirts I bought that I would never wear. Once I put on, I'm like, this is why I said I wouldn't buy this. It's broken. It looks so much better on the hanger than when I put it on me. It's clearly broken. And I realize you can only window shop for so long before sooner or later you'll find yourself buying something you would not have bought back when you had more objectivity in you. And he took this stuff, and let me tell you what he does. He breaks it, he burns it, he crushes it to powder. Crushes it to powder. How many of these things are Humpty Dumpty? You just can't put it back together again. He burns the wooden image. He took the bones, and then it says in verse 16, and we're almost done here with this so we can get to the good news. Wouldn't that be nice? You saw the tombs that were on the mountain, and he asked about them, and he said, well, these were the tombs of those false priests. And understand what happened is they were given an honorable burial. And he goes, wait a minute. Look at it. Every memory you have is buried. So you choose where you want to bury it. There are areas of your life when you were in that situation, you hated it so bad. You hated it so bad you cried out to God to get out of it. And then God took you out of it, and now you have to decide where to bury it. It's amazing how some of those things get honorable burials. So later on, when you look back, you're like, no, it wasn't so bad. It wasn't so bad. You're right, it wasn't so bad. It was worse than so bad. You were in a horrible relationship, you get out and like, I miss that person. Those few moments. And he's like, you know what? These things should not get honorable burials. Takes them out and he burns the bones. Like, that's done. And he goes, what about that one? He goes, that was that one prophet that stood up and spoke against all the way back. Please hear me in this. That's the one person that stood up when people were departing. When that gold calf was there, he stood up and went, this is wrong. Do you remember some of you when you departed? When you started flunking out of devotion? You started veering towards that other thing. You started veering towards whatever your cow is. And someone went, dude, this is not right. You shouldn't be playing like this. This is so not what God wants for you. And you dissed them because you were too hungry for the cow. And goes, let's make sure he gets the right burial. Now, for some of you, to be honest, what that means is you may be calling up an old friend that you've broken ties off with because they told you the truth and you fell out because of it. You know what? I'm so sorry. I was such a jerk. For some people you can't do that with. Well, then settle it in your heart to give a proper burial in life. Is that fair? Took away the shrines. You executed the high priests, by the way. Would you say that's a little harsh? I remind you, priests of the high places were the people, in the simplest sense, who sit down with you. And they'll call themselves Christians, and I'm not telling you they aren't. But I'm telling you, he executed these guys. And they said, I know this is what the word says. But come on, let's just be honest. Is that really practical? Is it feasible to do that today, really? Come on, really? Back off of that. You realize that's a priest of a high place. That's going, come on, the Bible, really? No. We have new prophecies, and they kind of negate some of this stuff. Now, I'm not talking about, like, you know, the food laws, the kosher laws from Leviticus 11. I'm talking about, you have enough in the New Testament I mean, it's like, I'm going to sue that brother. I'm saying, well, hold on a second. We should probably take a look at 1 Corinthians 5 and 6 if we're going to do that. And you're like, oh, but I have a right. Oh, he calls you a slave. I'm not too sure how much right you have. Oh, shut up. Forget it. I'm doing it anyway. And you're like, okay. And it's like, the reason I say that is, I've done this where people are like, Pastor Tony, is this right? And you're like, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. Let's see what the Bible says. The Bible says this is wrong. And you know what people will do? You're in trouble if they're like, thank you. And then they go online. You know what's going to happen when you go online. Because there's always going to be somebody telling you no matter what it is, it's okay. It doesn't matter. To marry a chicken, there's places for that. There's a woman who married herself. Have you heard about this? She married herself. I mean, if she ever needs to get a divorce, I'm not exactly sure how that works. And who keeps what? And then there was the woman who married a rock. Right? It was a rock she could carry, by the way. It was even a small one, so it was a comfortable rock. And I'm like, I think someone just accidentally threw your husband. It's like, and the only reason I say that is, it's like, if you really want, let's just spend this. If you really want to sin, you can find false priests of your high places, no matter what that high place is you want to build on. Whatever hill you want to die on, there will be a priest there for you. Thank the internet for that. But if you want the truth, then get real friends. And a real friend isn't going to let you believe a lie. And a real friend's going to hold on to this book and say, we should check and see what this book says. And let's be honest, the moment you do that, some of you are going to go, okay, I'm really sorry I called you. No, you don't look that sick. The doctor says you're dying. I think I want a second opinion. No, you don't really look that bad. You're going to die in a week unless you get help. The last thing he does is he takes those people. Notice that's the last thing. He takes those people and he says, these people are going to be gone. They're not going to just be gone. I'm not just going to kill them. I'm going to kill them. And then he's going to burn men's bones on them. He's like, by the time it's done, he's like, you are not going to want to go near this. Hey, are there anyone in your life right now that you actually, I'm not telling you you need to kill anyone, but can you kill the contact? You're like, you know what? I don't think we should talk for a little while. You know what that means on the other line? Give her a day or two. I'm sure if you're not this person, you've known people like this, that break up with someone for very, very great reasons. And then you're like, yeah, dude, I'm so glad you broke up with that guy. That guy was such a horrible thing. And then they're back with him 2 days later, and now it's awkward because you just talked about, yeah, he was really horrible. What a jerk that guy was. Oh, you guys are back together again. That's so sweet, right? And then it's like, oh, and then of course then it goes back, and it's like, oh, I'm breaking up with him again. Good, but I'm afraid to say anything, And the only reason I say that, it's like, you're like, well, he just keeps calling me back. And they're like, well, then why don't you change your number? That is so much work. Well, apparently you don't hate this enough. Let's face it, if you hate it enough, you'll not only change your number, you'll move to another country if you have to. I've had stalkers, and I'll tell you what, changing your number is not enough. Getting out is a good idea. Because you're like, there's nothing healthy or good about this. I want out of this, and I don't want anywhere near this. I don't want anywhere near this. Hey, look, I'm not telling you to go out there and grab a knife on anyone, but I am telling you, there are some of us, you need to go, I can never do all contacts because I'm just not sure, so even when you delete things, sometimes you're not sure if you deleted it right. That makes sense. You hit all contacts, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's like 1,000 some people, and I'm like, okay, who's on that list? And the reason I say that is it's like, there are people in your life, if somebody's actually telling you that what the Bible says is not okay, is okay, kill that contact. For your own sake. Now, can I say, in the summing up of all of this, do you know the first thing the king did in this chapter? He opened up the Bible. He opened it up, and he read it to people. Then he said, now, who's with me? Let's go clean house. And then he ended with this. Now let's celebrate the Lamb. Let's get back to the Lamb. Does that make sense? Do you know what we did tonight? We started by reading the Word. Then we did some house cleaning. And then I say, let's get back and celebrate. For what it's worth, this chapter or this life of Josiah will end, and for what it's worth, a quick side note, epilogue. There is the Pharaoh at the time, and I think it's the 20th year of Josiah's reign. There's a guy named Necho. And Necho, for what it's worth, was in competition with, at that time, the other world-dominating force, which was Assyria. And he wants to get into a battle with the guy, for what it's worth. And as he does, for what it's worth, Josiah wants to jump into that battle, and it was not his battle to fight. Now understand, in this Passover that he had right before that, the king gives 30,000 sheep. The leaders give 2,600 sheep. And this Levite chief and a handful of his brothers give 5,000 sheep. For what it's worth, that is 37,600 sheep just alone. And then there's cows. That's actually one of my favorite things in light of all of this, by the way. 3,800 cows. No golden ones, just golden brown by the time they're done. And he says, there's nothing like this. But hear me on this. This was the battle for the king to fight. Then he jumps into a battle. Please hear me on this. Then he jumps into a battle that wasn't his to fight. And what Necho says is, do you know that actually God is actually leading me to this battle, and you're not a part of this? Don't meddle with this. This isn't your battle to fight. Josiah is so determined to fight in this battle, and part of one of the reasons is he's still vassal to Assyria. He's still paying money to Assyria. So he feels like he has to defend it. That he dresses up in disguise and gets nailed by the archers and dies. Now please hear me. If you're going to do this kind of housekeeping, as God has intended for you to do, if you're going to be in this place where God is going to, wouldn't it be great if this Sunday, or whenever that time was, or even prayerfully even before that, you went on a date with God and you were like, this is exactly what I was looking for. This is it. And God says, well, I'll just be honest, I haven't changed. Imagine God could pull that, I am perfect, right? So if there's a problem in the relationship, it ain't me. God speaking, not me. So when something is good between you and God, and you have a great encounter between you and God, I think you know what the variable is. And he really wants that. But how could you possibly, could you imagine me having a great relationship with Suzanne if there were people that hated Suzanne that were good friends of mine? Don't expect to diss my wife and us to be on good terms. Or my kids. You can imagine that. Now let's face it, that doesn't mean they don't do wrong things and they need to be dealt for the wrong things, specifically my kids. But please understand, when you love someone, you're with them. But imagine still having a bunch of false priests in your life of your high places. And then you want to go and clean with God, and you've had people dissing God throughout your week. Now, I'm not talking about people you work with or those kind of things you're seeking to minister to, but the people that you know the difference between an acquaintance and a friend. A friend has the privilege of influence in your life. Acquaintances are people you're going to be acquainted with. You're familiar with them. My kids know this. They were raised on this. Every person you meet's an acquaintance, but they graduate to friend because you pick your friends. And so pick who you would rather be influenced by. And if people who you quote are your friends have the power of influence, are dissing the God you claim is the most important person in your life, I think it's time to at least delegate them to the position of acquaintance. Because otherwise, you're just getting back to the lamb ain't going to be the same. And so I want to pray for us in this. I know this is heavy. How great to end it with something like this, because you realize for the rest of your life as a Christian, you're going to have dates with God. Now, whether that's on a Sunday or a midweek or something you personally ordain, or it's an Israel trip or whatever it is, somewhere down the line. And you find sometimes, like I think every Israel trip I have, that's like the first 4 days of it are usually me detoxing, which is me going through these things with God. God, are there any high places? Am I adulating something I shouldn't? Is there something, forbid that, God, please forbid that there be anything in this temple that's been constructed that's in competition with you in any arena. And I want to get quiet enough to hear that. And it isn't like I go, oh, those first 2 days are awesome. It's like, Those are the days when I'm like, God, is there anything that needs to be ripped out of this? Because in the first part, I'm like, okay, I'll give you 10 minutes to say something. Okay, good, we're cool. And then it's like, then you get those times away and you're like, all right, we're taking days on this one. Then you start opening up the Bible and you're like, oh, this is where the romance is again. And I can't tell you who you are, but I know me, and I'm a romantic when it comes to God. And when it's romantic, and that doesn't mean I get a touchy-feely, my hair stand on end or whatever. It's just like, there's this you just know that you're right with God and you're intimate and you're breathing the same air together, so to speak, at that moment. If your hearts are beating in pulse and in tandem, and you just go, yeah, this is it right here. And you realize, why am I not like this all the time? So I'll head back to London, and I come back to London, and it's like high places on parade. Everything about life is finding high places. It's finding things that want to move its way into the shrine, into the temple, and enshrine itself there. And it's on display, and it's pushed in your face. And you just feel yourself going, But God never intended that. So let's pray. A dangerous prayer. And then let's worship the Lamb, shall we?